$38 billion in sales, 439 stores. We're the 6th largest grocery chain in the United States, but we only operate stores here. But Texas is a big place. I mean, if you flip Texas on its side in one direction, it lands at the Atlantic Ocean. And if you flip Texas on its side on the other way, it lands at the Pacific Ocean. From here, it's a longer drive to El Paso than it is from El Paso to San Antonio. So it's a big place. We're vertically integrated. We make a lot of our own stuff. We make bread, we make ice cream, we cut our own meat, we make milk. We're the largest exporter of tortillas to Mexico. I'm not sure what that means, but we send a lot of them over there. We have 130,000 people who work for us. I guess what makes us unique, and this shows our market share in each market that we operate. When I joined HEB in 1990, I asked a friend of mine that I knew in Dallas, where I was living at the time, what's it like to work for, what's HEB like? He said, in San Antonio, you don't go to the supermarket, you go to HEB. And if you can look, our market share in San Antonio is 78%. And if you go to Waco or to Corpus Christi, our market share is 83%. And so we started what Florence Budd did, is she put stores back when there was no air conditioning where nobody wanted to live. And then air conditioning came along and y'all started to move to Texas. And I urge you guys to come because I need the business. And Brian could use the help, so come on down. But we compete against people who are, like Walmart's 17 times bigger than us. Amazon's 45 times bigger than us. For many years I would go to bed at night and say, dear God, please don't let Walmart squish us like a bug, amen. And what's happened is, like, how do you compete with somebody that big? And our marketing strategy in 4 words is this: sell shit they don't. Because if we sell the same things that Walmart does, is they're so much bigger that they have economies that we don't. So let me show you a couple of examples. We are known for our store-made tortillas. We just opened up a store in Frisco. There was a line 40 deep for people to walk up. It was almost like a bread line in Russia, except they were trying to get tortillas because we couldn't make them fast enough. We make our own guacamole. Fresh in store. And what we found is that in general, people like to eat guacamole, they don't like to make guacamole. In Texas, this is an interesting phenomenon. Wherever you live, if you don't live in Texas, you eat different than us. I mean, we eat hamburgers and we eat pizza, but I grew up in California and I never ate a brisket until I moved to Texas. I grew up eating tri-tip, and then I moved here and I realized it was a religious experience. You buy a 24-pack of beer, a brisket, and some charcoal. Step 1, drink a beer. Step 2, put the charcoal in the barbecue. Step 3, drink a beer. Step 4, light the charcoal. Step 5, and like 12 hours later, as best you can recall, you had an amazing piece of meat. We know Texans love brisket. We know they love queso, especially when they're watching the Cowboys. And so we put them together. You put it in the oven for 10 minutes, and after 10 minutes, you take a spoon and you stir it. And once you stir it, you say, you know what? I made that. And everybody wants to be a hero to their, to their family. Something else we focus a lot on is understanding our customers and what makes them different. And here's a good example. These are my daughters on one side, my parents on the other. And generationally, there is a big difference between the value of time and the value of money. That my daughters would gladly spend $10 to save 15 minutes because they're ordering their dinner off of Uber Eats. My dad would have driven all over town to save a nickel on gas simply so he could brag about it. And so understanding this is people are willing to pay for convenience. And I say never underestimate the laziness of the American public. We take a loaf of bread, we cut the crust off of it, and we charge an extra $1.50 for it. And I called the buyer and I said, really, you've gone too far. And he said, oh, have I? He said, I'll sell 1 million loaves this year. He sold 2 million. So people will pay for convenience, and you will too. It's interesting. We did a study of our customers and asked 100 customers to send a photo of every meal they ate for a week. And we laid them all over a ballroom, kind of like this, to see. And our biggest learning was 2/3 of them ate off paper plates. And so out of that, we didn't change the food we offered. What we changed was the size of our paper plate sets, and we introduced the 300 count, because if you have more paper plates at home, you'll use more. But we've all been through a lot. And one of the things that you just talked about in your opening remarks were, it's nice to be able to get back together and see each other as opposed to on a screen and via Zoom. And we were all going through uncharted waters through the pandemic. You were, I was. And this depicts right here kind of the distinction between when things are normal, you can have managers. But when things become unpredictable, you need leadership. And every week, I'm sure it was the same for you, some new obstacle would come up and you couldn't go to your bookcase behind your desk and pull out a manual that says, what do I do now? Because to be honest, in many of these instances, we get 4 people up and we make this shit up as long as we went along. And we just did the absolute best that we could. And what we said as a guiding principle up front was we needed to make sure that our customers and our employees felt safe to come into our stores. And secondly, we needed something to sell them. And those were the 2 key things that we did. And along the way, whether it was masks, whether it was vaccines, whether it was opening early for senior shopping hours, whether it was running out of toilet paper, whatever the case may be, we had to get very inventive in terms of how we went about doing it. A couple things happened during the pandemic. When I joined HEB, 2/3 of all meals eaten were prepared at home. And by 2010, you can see that 60% of all meals were eaten away from the home, which would say the supermarket business is not a good business to be in because you're losing, the term we would use is share of stomach. If all the food that goes into your mouth creates a pie chart in your stomach, you can see we lost share. Now the good news is people got fatter over time. No, I'm just kidding. The fact of the matter is more people moved to Texas, and as they moved to Texas, our business grew, but then all of a sudden all the restaurants closed down, and we had a huge gain. Supermarket business was good to be in, but we found that many people didn't want to come into our stores, so we had to gear up the ability to order online and come pick it up. And we more than tripled our business in doing that. And again, no manual for how to figure that out. So there are 4 reasons why you shop where you shop, or I shop where I shop. First reason, convenience. Some place is close to your house. Second reason is price. I've never heard anyone say, I drove past a Chevron station because I think Shell gas is better. You buy gas because you're either about to run out, convenience, or you buy it because it's the cheapest price. Third reason you shop somewhere is because of the quality of the product there. I don't eat pizza very often. When I do, I'm going to get the best pizza I can and treat myself. I'm not going to eat a lousy pizza. I'm not going to eat a frozen pizza. I'm going to get the best, and that's where I go. And the 4th reason that you shop somewhere is because of the people. And that's what I'm going to talk about through the rest of my speech, is the importance of people and culture. Culture, easily defined, is what you do when your CEO isn't in the room. It's the unwritten rules of how things work. And I think to myself, as I've been married for 42 years, I love my wife, but many weeks I spend more time at work than I do with my wife. Therefore, it only stands to reason that you want to have a culture where people come to work. And every business has a culture. Enron had a culture. It just they didn't manage it. All businesses look at strategy. Your business has a strategy in terms of what you're going to do around making your numbers, looking at recidivism, looking at retention. There's a strategy associated with that. But many organizations don't pay a lot of attention to the culture. And the culture acts as a fletching on a strategy arrow that allows it to go faster and allows it to go higher. And I'd offer one of the things we do at HEB is we tend to our culture every single week. Tomorrow we'll announce a $200 per employee bonus that will cost us $37 million, because rather than looking at how little we can pay our people, we look at how much can we pay them, and they've worked very hard this year. Another piece of our culture is curiosity. Now, curiosity is an interesting thing because we all have our own way of seeing the world. We all have our own way of how we think things should be done. And the older you get, I'm 65, the more you get locked into thinking, oh, well, the way I think about it is the way it should be. But what happens is if you're curious about how the world operates, how other prisons operate, how other industries operate, and what can you learn from them, then you find out that you actually become a bigger person. When I went to school and I copied off my neighbor's paper, I got kicked out. When I got into the business world and I plagiarized, I got promoted. And I've had a 40-year career of trying to find better ways to do something, by copying someone else. And a piece of that is using these two things. They're called ears. And you know, if you rework the letters in the word listen, it says silent. And so here are a couple of examples of what's happened at HEB. We have a store in Houston that we were going to open up that was in a predominantly Jewish area. And my store manager, who's on the left there, he said, you know, I've been reading about people who eat kosher, and it strikes me that it's a lot like having to eat gluten-free. Because you want variety, it's just that it's not available. And he said, I think we should study it more before we open. And so we sent him to live in Brooklyn for 3 weeks. He lived in a kosher hotel. He hung out with this guy, who obviously is a rabbi. And when he came back, we went to work on developing products specifically for the kosher customer. Not to say that kosher customers were 50% of our clientele. Not to say that Jewish customers, because only a segment of Jewish customers keep kosher, make up 50% of our clientele. But we offer kosher sushi, we offer kosher tortillas, a religious figure has to cut kosher meat. We have 3 of them in our store. And what the clientele in that area realized was that because we respect them, that they want to give us their business. And it was because we listened to him. You know, everybody has 4 ideas. Everybody. Throughout your organization, throughout my organization. 2 of them suck. 1 of them is probably pretty good. And if you listen hard enough to people, they will share their good ideas with you, and especially those who are closest to the work. Because the higher up you go in the organization, the more detached. One of the questions I ask on every store visit to someone is, if you and I could change jobs tomorrow, and you were in charge of HEB, what is the first thing you would do to make your job easier? And I write it down. And it takes a big burden off me from having to figure it out. Now, this is one of my favorite stories. You can order your groceries online, you can come and pick them up, you park in the parking lot, and it doesn't rain that much here, but it rains. The term we use in Texas is it rains like a cow pissing on a flat rock. I mean, it rains hard in Texas. We have as much rain in Houston as there is in Seattle. It just all comes in 6 days. It comes down hard. And so this guy on the left here, his name's Mark. He's a maintenance guy in the store, which means he cleans the stores and he cleans the bathrooms. And he saw our employees carry the groceries out to the store in the rain, and they were getting wet and the groceries were being wet. So he had a shop in his house, and he went home and he built that canopy. And he came back in. It's a guy who earns $19 an hour. Nobody asked him to do it. And so I went up to see him because I heard about it, and he said, you know, this one cost me $205, but I've got one, I think I could do it for $185. At our core, we all want the opportunity to make a difference. Doesn't matter if you're a correction officer, doesn't matter if you're a warden, doesn't matter if you're a maintenance man, doesn't matter if you're me. We want the opportunity and the chance to make a difference. And the reality is, within our culture, what we do is we work hard to listen to people, and we will roll this idea out to each and every store because he cared enough to make it happen. And it was a good idea. We were going to roll it out as a bad idea. But now he feels that he's part of a movement, and what he does is not a job, but he feels emotionally linked to what it is that he does. Adam Grant is a business writer, and he says it takes curiosity to learn. That's what I just talked about. But the flip side of curiosity is that it takes courage to unlearn. In other words, to be willing to divorce yourself from what you think is right. Learning requires the humility to admit what you don't know today. And unlearning requires the integrity to admit you were wrong yesterday. The idea of not being curious as I get older scares the shit out of me, because I'm afraid I will become irrelevant and become complacent. And so anytime I walk into a competitor's store with someone, we have a rule: we don't leave until we come up with an idea that we think we can steal. Sometimes you got to stay in them for a long time to figure something out. But there's something to learn everywhere. Second thing that we do at HEB is we focus a lot on persistence. And if you think about the construction of a sentence, that a sentence or a period is a punctuation marking a hard stop. That, you know what, this is at the end of this idea, we're going to move on to the next. And if you think about persistence or an obstacle, that oftentimes we'll run into a lot of periods that feel like a hard stop. Now sometimes when you send a text to someone, You may see this on your phone. I always call them 3 periods till I learned the fancy word. It's called an ellipsis. And whenever I see an ellipsis pop up, I have a sense of anticipation for what might be next, that something else is coming along. And what I found is that when I feel that I've hit a hard stop, that maybe I need to add 2 more dots and turn it into an ellipsis and think about another way to skin a cat. I moved here, and I moved to Houston in 2003. Before that I lived in San Antonio, and I'd never been involved with a hurricane. In 2005, 3 weeks after Katrina, a major hurricane was going to hit Beaumont, and FEMA came and set up shop there and told everyone in East Texas they needed to evacuate. A lot of Cajuns live there. They're stubborn folks. They weren't going to leave. So the hurricane hit, lost all electricity, and FEMA said no one is allowed to come into this area. They shut down I-10. Well, I had 9 stores that had lost power, and it was 90 degrees outside. And let me tell you, produce, when it sits in a store at 90 degrees without any refrigeration, can get rancid pretty quick. And so I chartered a helicopter to go over to meet with FEMA so I could get in, and they wouldn't meet with me. So I went back, and I rented 3 buses and put 50 people on each bus. Got a Cadillac Escalade. Somebody had a flashing blue light. We put that on top of it, and I typed up a letter, and it said, "To whom it may concern, these buses have been authorized by Scott McClelland," that would be me, "to enter the Golden Triangle, Beaumont, Port Arthur, Orange, in order to," I'm having trouble reading, I'll just paraphrase, "in order to get everything out of the store so we can reopen them." So off they go, they hit the Beaumont city limit, the police stop them and say, "You can't come in." And they said, "Well, we're authorized." And they said, "What do you mean?" And they handed him the letter. And the policeman looked at it and he said, "Follow me," and he gave him a police escort to the first store. And look, a store does not look pretty when it has a bunch of water inside of it. And the term that we got out of that was, look, sometimes you gotta fake it till you make it. And act like you know what you're doing, but find ways to get through an ordeal or an obstacle or an incident. So persistence, important. A brand, this is from the CEO, former founder and CEO of Under Armour. He said, "A brand is built on trust. Trust is built 1 drop at a time. Like every time you come into HEB and you have a good experience, it's a drop that goes into the bucket. But when you screw up, you can lose it by the bucketful. And you can look at company after company where all of a sudden they didn't handle a situation correctly, and the next thing they know, they've lost sales, they've lost market share. And the trust piece, and I'm sure you hear it a lot within your organization, is how do you create trust, forget the inmates, with the people who work for you? And this is something that we've had to square off with. This is called the culture quadrant. And if you look at this, if you look at managers or employees who work for you, is that on one axis, you have, do they uphold the culture that we want? And then on the other axis is, do they get results? And it's easy to know with people what to do with people who get good results and who uphold the culture. You promote them. And it's easy to know what to do with people who don't get good results and don't uphold the culture. You fire them. It's a little bit harder. What happens if somebody doesn't get good results, but they really are a good culture fit? Maybe they're in the wrong job. But it's this upper left-hand quadrant that is the tough one to deal with. What do you do with people who get results but undermine the culture? And every year, 2 times a year, I would stand in front of every store manager at HEB, and I would say, "You can't be an asshole and run one of my stores because I have too much at risk. I have 400 to 600 people working in every store, and if they're coming to work wondering what kind of mood you're going to be in, they aren't going to have huge loyalty to where they work, and if they aren't happy with where they work, then they aren't going to be good for the customers." I just saw this last week, and I thought it really rang true, right? And I call that addition by subtraction right there as a way to look at it. But the idea is to create a culture where people feel they can contribute, where they get energized when they have to rise up and overcome an obstacle, and they feel like you care about them. And right now, it's even harder for people coming out of COVID. Obviously, in your business and our business, we can't do it remotely. You can't check out groceries from home, and you certainly can't oversee a prison from home either. But What we do know is that people are struggling for a variety of reasons. The seclusion that people felt outside of work. And so trying to create an environment where people want to come to work can make a big difference. And so by doing this, what we really try to do is create a situation where I'll be out and people will talk to me about, well, at my HEB, I'll do this. And I think one of the things that sets HEB apart from our competitors is we don't view how we put products in our stores based off of the average American. Because we're from, one thing about Texas is we're Texans first, we're Americans second. We're proud to be Americans, we're really proud to be Texans. And we eat differently. Whereas Walmart, they view an average American, and if I took you to 3 Walmarts in 3 different states, they would all have the same products in them. Whereas if I took you to 2 stores in San Antonio, one on one side of town, one on the other, we would merchandise it differently based off the people who shop there. So what happens is people say, look, this is my HEB, and once they say the word my, we now have an emotional connection. And that emotional connection creates loyalty and has allowed us to get to the kind of market share that we want to have. I commend you for what you do. I know it's not easy work. It especially hasn't been easy over the course of the last 3 years. Think about this, it really hasn't been easy for the people who work for you either. And so love up on them, find a way to have them feel special, listen to them for good ideas, because as you hear from them, it will make your job easier. And thank you for keeping our country and our state safe. Thank you so much.
Did he nail it or what? I think that deserves another round.
I was hoping I was going to get a pair of handcuffs. Is there any chance?
No, I hope it's something that you may value more. So finding something that someone like Mr. McClelland may not have is pretty difficult. But we did a little digging. We understand there may have been an opportunity for you at some point to climb Mount Everest.
I did, last month.
We had a parade
Well,
down here.
how nice. Thank you.
Framed it in a great picture.
Thank you. Well, if you climb Mount Everest, you come back skinnier than when you went. And you come back for an appreciation for the food that we eat, but it was a terrific experience. Look, you all learned more about the grocery business than you ever wanted to know in the last 20 minutes. But thank you very much, and Brian, thank you so much. Appreciate it.